Hello, everyone. Welcome to Civic History. Today, we will be discussing the Whigs, the original party of no. So, our story begins with the Federalists and Alexander Hamilton. The Northern right-wing party focused around building America as an economic and middle-class business state as opposed to the yeoman farmer/slave republic of agrarianism that Thomas Jefferson had in mind. One of the earliest origins of the Whigs can be found in this election, in which Andrew Jackson won, except he didn't. Despite coming away with the plurality of electoral votes and a quite near majority in the popular vote, he did not reach enough electoral votes. So the election was thrown to the House and because of the four-way split, as the Democratic Republicans of Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Secretary Crawford, and Henry Clay. Andrew, not Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson wishes he had this, and his main man, Martin Van Buren, was busy working for Crawford at the time. The House of Representatives voted instead to elect John Quincy Adams president because he was just better at schmoozing Congress. Now, a lot of people talk this up to the corrupt bargain. That was Andrew Jackson who called it that. Henry Clay was going to be Crawford's Secretary of State. Henry Clay probably would have been Jackson's Secretary of State should he have been elected. He was a good diplomat. He negotiated treaties. He was Speaker of the House, so it made sense that naturally he would be whoever the next President's Secretary of State would be. But Andrew Jackson called it a corrupt bargain. So these two infamous men of history, Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams, would over time transform away from the Democratic Republican Party, splitting it. They grew frustrated with the old Democratic Republican motto. John Quincy Adams sort of had this thought of like, okay, so a national bank and state military is fine, but an infrastructure bill is a little too far. Okay, bro. Yeah, sure. And many were upset at the growing Jacksonian movement throughout the country, as literally the day after the election basically was declared that Jackson didn't win, Tennessee nominated him to run for president. Henry Clay, who was trying to build on Alexander Hamilton's economic ideas and was fearful that too much suffrage would lead to tyranny of the commons, what many people actually at the time believed when you hear the constitutional republic is to protect us from the majority opinion becoming dictated by law. Many early Whiggish thought people were more like, no, the Constitution protects us from having to be worried that the people might vote for us. Well, the next election comes around, and the anti-Jacksonian party, also known as the National Republican Party, loses. There was also a group called the Anti-Masonic Party. We'll get to them. John C. Calhoun had defected and announced his support for Andrew Jackson in the election, and Jackson won the election quite handedly on a platform of populism and paying down the national debt, as opposed to Quincy Adams' plans for a national university, internal improvements, stuff that's going to become very familiar soon. So, the two legal no-one Whig forerunners, even though there's a pretty decent line you connect them to the Federalists, were the National Republican, which was basically a party of Jackson is bad, plus some stuff about internal improvements, and the Anti-Masonic Party, which was an anti-elite party built around the conspiracy theory that Freemasons were subverting, there we go, our democracy. And guess who was a Freemason? Andrew Jackson. They accused them of believing in false gods and other stuff like that, but their other big tenet was a national tariff, a large national tariff, which attracted many conspiratorial middle-class people to their party, including one Thaddeus Stevens, and John Quincy Adams. So another two big important parts to understand about the Whigs, or what soon be the Whigs, is that they favored a strong federal government but with a weak president, as opposed to the Democrats who favored a weak federal government but with a strong executive branch. Now, the reason why I have Parliament here is that the Whigs sort of viewed America as improving on the Parliament model, that Congress and the Speaker of the House would actually be the most important person, and the President would be merely an executive figurehead. Sure, they'd have some roles. It'd be a bit like the President of Germany. Most of the nation's power would be resulted in the Speaker of the House. There was also Henry Clay and his American system. He wanted to improve upon Alexander Franklin's American school, so he came up with the American system. And this was a plan of internal improvements, maintenance of public land prices to generate federal revenue on contracts, gotta love those excise taxes, and preservation of the national bank to rein in risky lending by local banks, as well as establish nearly a national currency and a high tariff to generate more money for the federal government, thus to fund these things. But the Whigs are in full swing by the end of Jackson's thing, but it's not enough. They can't coalesce around a single candidate. This person who comes in second will become president, William Henry Harrison, but later. But instead, Martin Van Buren wins, the true founder of the Democratic Party, because he actually organized the whole thing. Jackson was just the guy on the horse that they needed to win. But luck struck bad for old dear Van. Old Kinderhook got struck with the worst depression ever. The Panic of 1837 is so bad that it rivals the Great Depression. Some have said it's the worst depression in American history, though that's a bit far, in my opinion. But the economy went bad, so the Whigs got kicked in. And Van, old Kinderhook, couldn't really come up with a solution to get his way out of it because he couldn't do a national bank because the Democrats opposed that. And he couldn't do the independent treasury system because it didn't work. So the Whigs came in, electing President William Henry Harrison, who died really shortly after being elected, like a month. He got a cold, allegedly from standing in the rain, though there's some other debate that it could have been Washington, D.C.'s horrid sewer system. I go with he was a 68-year-old man living in the early 1800s. He probably, had something else wrong that was exacerbated by standing in the rain for 2 hours. Pneumonia is hard to fight off when you're older. But anyways, he ran on it. He also instituted a very modern presidential campaign, giving rallies, speaking. Uh, his campaign is credited for getting the phrase "getting the ball rolling" started, because there's a giant roll of tin, as well as he liked hard cider, because he was a frontiersman. But simple things, ran on the Whiggish platform, was their guy on the horse, the great general of the Battle of Tippecanoe. The song was Tippecanoe and Tyler too. But he died. Press F to pay respects. So we end up with terrible treasonous Tyler, the second Whig president, who wasn't a Whig. He was a Democrat for all intents and purposes. But he did do two interesting things. One, he made annexing Texas, the Republic of Texas, the Lone Star Republic, and its weird borders, his champion issue. That was his way that he was going to win the election and break through the party politics. And second, the reason why he broke with the Whigs first was that the Whigs didn't think he should be president. The Whigs interpreted the Article 2 thing about the vice president as not a traditional, the vice president, what we think of it today with the 25th Amendment. The second the president dies, the vice president takes an oath that they've already taken, just in case, and they become president of the United States. In this case, there was a plan that Well, maybe he'll serve as acting president until as Congress can call a new election. Others believed that he was to serve as interim president until Congress and the Senate could elect a new president. Uh, Instead, the Democrats who controlled Congress said, no, it's pretty clear. The vice president assumes the presidency. So that's why the reason why he's terrible and treasonous is he literally sided with the Confederacy and was a member of the Confederate Congress. But speaking of Texas, this is another thing the Whigs opposed: Manifest Destiny. The Whigs were an anti expansionist party for two reasons. One, they said it kept burning up the slavery issue. And two, well, if you're a northern industrialist, why would you want more agriculture? Henry Clay makes another attempt at the presidency and loses to James K. Polk, who was running as Young Hickory, the revenge of Andrew Jackson. Polk, one of our, lesser known presidents who was actually quite good, does the Mexican American War, inflaming Whig tensions, but after the victory in the Mexican American War and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, as well as the Gadsden Purchase to get most of the Southwest, these two Whigs, one demanded that, one right here, demanded to know the very spot on American soil in which the Mexican army invaded and killed Americans to start the war. And two, Mr. Quincy Adams over here, while giving a speech explaining why the soldiers of the Mexican American War should not be receiving some congressional award, died of a brain aneurysm. He quite literally died disrespecting the troops. But finally, a Whig, and a Southern Whig at that, also known as a Cotton Whig, was elected president. Hero of the Mexican American War, Zachary Taylor, was elected president, and quite a reasonable thing. Famous as many of our presidents who have become generals, people who went directly from general to the presidency, did not vote, was not a member of the Whig till they offered the nomination to him, just because he thought they were cool. And guess what? He died. Allegedly, he died from gastritis after food poisoning from enjoying too much cherries with clotted cream at the 4th of July. Though others say it was cholera from the lake of shit that surrounded Washington, D.C. at the time for their poor waste. I personally think it's a mix of both. I don't know how good the water was that cleaned those cherries that he was eating. But his administration was followed by the Fillmore administration. Millard Fillmore, if you're familiar with the comic. Mr. Mallard there, mostly contended with Whig things. His big issue was trying to punt on slavery, because this was starting to be the only issue that really talked about it. His plan was to create a northern slavery, an issue that the North would have that they could go up against the South with when it came to slavery. The idea being, what if we had something that would so unite us as a northern region that, like, if it would be our main thing. So he decided racism. He pushed for a anti-Catholic sentiment. He was going to get rid of the Romanists. That was his big plan to form a northern symbol that could be a slavery but for the North and as an issue. Guess what? It didn't work. Though the America Party was quite impressive in its electoral gains, it didn't work. It never won the presidency. Their next candidate, because Fillmore lost renomination, or perhaps just said, I didn't want it, was Old Fuss and Feathers, who lost to a distant cousin of mine, apparently, Franklin Pierce. There would never be another Whig president after Mallard Fillmore there, unless you count Lincoln, who was a former Whig, or Hayes, who was also a former Whig. But the collapse. The party basically couldn't decide what it wanted to be anymore. And this is the problem with being a party of no, that you sort of have to slap ideologies and beliefs onto. Is that there was the Southern Whigs who mainly just wanted a federal government that would make it easier to get their product of cotton to New York to sell it. And then the Northern Whigs who were running, we got to kick out the Catholics. There's too many Irish people. The tariffs needs to be higher. Farmers are bad, but development and frontiersmen are good. And it was seceded. In the North, it first tried to become the Know Nothings, or the Free, and some bounce between the resurrected anti-Masonic Party, but eventually it became the Republican Party. After it merged with the Free Soils, a northern faction of the Know Nothings, also known as the American Party, the North America Party, which was an anti-slavery party, and the Liberty Party. In the South, the Whigs either became Democrats, stayed as Whigs, or joined one of the many Unionist parties, the Unconditional Unionist Party, the Constitutional Union Party, which were still trying to hammer out a compromise on slavery. Endless compromise, but at this point, it became too harsh. Well, anyways, that's enough on the Whigs. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a wonderful week. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're feeling generous, share the video with a friend. Bye, y'all.